Okay, so welcome again to the workshop on student retention in online classes. This is a discussion more than a workshop. And just so you know, I do not claim to be an expert on student retention. That I don't really have any real specific advice or anything like that, but I do have some information that I've learned through research and some things to think about. And my hope is that I'll present that to you and that it will spark some conversation and some discussion with all of you, and that you'll have some things to add, some things that you've been thinking about, and you might have some questions of your own. And so some of the questions that I started out with when I did my research, and when I talk about my research is I basically did a little bit of a review of the literature, and I'm just going to talk about it briefly here and not go too much in depth. You can read a lot more if you want to read the articles themselves. I have a blog post that contains links to many of these articles, or else a reference, so you can go ahead and look at that and read it in full. I'm just pulling out some highlights, and then that blog post will be available afterwards for everybody, as well as I'll hopefully have a link to these slides as well. So the questions that I started out with were why does retention differ even when the same instructor is teaching the same class? Why might retention be different? What can an instructor do to help? Is it about student retention or student success? Some studies look more at student success, some look at student retention. The way that it's defined can be very different, but they are two different things. Somebody staying in the class past the drop date and somebody passing the class and finishing the class, it's different things. So and we want to make sure that we're talking about the right thing. And whose issue is retention? Is it the student, the instructor, the department, or the institution? And think about your questions while we go over some of these little tidbits of information. And at the end, hopefully, you can ask some of them. And my hope is that we'll all share with one another some of the things that we've been thinking about. Okay, so I know there's some people who are here from outside of MiraCosta, so I'm just going to briefly mention why this is an important conversation to have. There is some research that's been done and some statistics that pulled together about success and retention at MiraCosta compared with the state overall. Now, our success numbers actually look pretty good compared with the state, but our retention is a little bit lower. Why might that be? Our drop deadline is a little bit later than a lot of other colleges, but it is important to think about. Maybe there could be other reasons as well. And so it's just an important thing to talk about, and how we can help with retention, although our success, again, is pretty good. So that's a good thing. So I looked at 6 studies, and I'm just going to, like I said, share a little bit from each of them. And these are not all of the studies that are done out there. They're a nice sampling. I tried to find a variety of studies. And what was interesting to me is that I actually had a lot more questions after I did this research than answers. But that being said, the first study looked at, it was actually pretty scientific, and it really looked at 2 courses, and they were comparable and made sure they were matched in all the ways that might kind of, create an issue with the results. And they looked at whether video orientations, welcome emails, personal phone calls to students from the instructor, emails of the course contracts, which I don't know if any of us are doing that. And I'd have to look more specifically at what those included. But course syllabus and quizzes, start here documents, welcome to student services activities, introductions that are posted in the discussion board, icebreakers, team projects, and small group discussions. Now this one study, which there is a link when they're made available for you later, found that really there was not a huge difference in retention between the class that got these things and the class that didn't. And so it was kind of interesting to me that it really didn't make a huge difference, one of the things that we think. But this is just, again, one study. And so there's a lot of other studies that could be done to see if this is replicated across disciplines and across all kinds of different factors. The second study that I looked at support services, such as technical support, early alert systems for when students are struggling, advising services, case management advising, readiness assessments to see if students are ready for online learning, student orientations, tutoring, new student orientations, and e-newsletters. And really it just kind of overviewed that these were some of the things that were being done at this one institution. Or actually, it was not really an institution, it was a larger, broader system of colleges. And they didn't really talk about the outcomes of these, but they did say that face-to-face students started requesting a lot of these online support services, which I thought was pretty interesting to consider. And so that might be, we talk about providing more support for online students, but maybe it might even help in face-to-face classes as well. The third study that I looked at universal design for learning. And if you haven't heard about universal design for learning, which I'm sure most of you have, it really looks at how we can make content not just accessible for everyone who's taking a class, but that it gives them opportunities to use their strengths and learning and in providing the information that they've been learned to us in as far as assessments are concerned and things like that. And so it looks at a lot of different factors and just how to make courses high quality in those ways. And so this study just really suggested that universal design for learning should increase student retention. And I couldn't find in that study specifically why they felt that way, but they felt it should. And so what they did find is that it could actually not just help students that were maybe needing things to be more accessible for some reason, whether it be vision or auditory learning or what have you, but they found that students in general might be more successful because they can maybe use their mobile devices a little bit more easily because they'd have more access to classes in that way. And this article just provided some strategies for things to implement that you could do within 20 minutes, 20 days, and 20 months. And so it really didn't, again, say whether it changed anything as far as retention, but it does suggest that using these strategies may help with retention. So you may have some thoughts and feelings or questions about that yourself. So the fourth study looked at how they talked to a variety of instructors, and what they wanted to see is how they dealt with referring students who needed student services and were struggling in their classes. And what they found is that instructors were all over the place as far as how they provided referrals for students and who they referred and how they did it. Some instructors did this a lot, others didn't do it as much, and or if ever. And so what they suggested is that really there should be more of a uniform way for referring students who might be struggling in their classes, particularly online. And that for online classes, there are some things that we might want to think about, such as the second thing here, online referral forms should be available for the instructor, so that if they do make a referral, they can fill out the form really easily online since we're teaching online. But the first thing they also mentioned was that faculty should have training that includes how to prevent attrition. So it didn't say specifically what that training should have in it, as far as I recall, but it did say that we should have more of a uniform way of dealing with this, instead of just talking about that we should make sure students stay in our classes. It also talked about including details in the faculty handbook about student support services so that everyone has the same information. And that might be something that we see here and there, depending on where you work, that you might have more information at some places and at other places as far as what you can put into your classes for students. And then have the e-learning department, and that might be called something different depending on where you work, reach out to faculty with student contact information so that it's easy for faculty to figure out how to contact students instead of having to hunt them down if we need to get a hold of them. And that might be easy depending, again, on where you are working. So I also try to find pretty new research. So if you see here, the dates are all relatively recent, so that it'd be timely. This study I looked at how we really, the lower levels of students are the ones that seem to be struggling in online classes more. So we need to find ways to support students who are at the lower levels, such as freshmen and sophomores, which in community college is really everyone. So we need to have more support for them and support students with lower GPAs that are more analytical and technical. They said that was one of the things that they talked about could be helpful after this is a result after they did some studies on students, and they wanted to see if there were student factors that increased retention or decreased retention. And minority students may be more likely to withdraw when they're in classes where there's a dominant gender in the class. So, for example, if the class is generally all males and you're the one or two female students in that class, you're more likely to withdraw is what they found, and vice versa. And so that's an important thing to consider, is that we look at the students who seem to maybe are not necessarily minorities in general, but in a majority in our class. And also following up with students when they withdraw for the first time, to help prevent future withdrawals. That if they do withdraw once, which doesn't help us in our class currently, that we should follow up with them and find out more about what we can do to support them. So the last study that I looked at was the biggest article. This one actually Lisa helped find for me, and I'm not going to pretend to be able to talk to you about all the content in it because it's a review of the literature, and it has a ton of information in it. So if there's any article that you look at, this could be the one that you might want to look at. But they did find that persistence was connected to a few things in some of the studies that they looked at. One is that students are more persistent when they're satisfied with online learning, when they have a sense of belonging, when they are motivated and have peer and family support, when they manage their time well, and when instructors have more communication with them. And so these are some of the things that, again, relate to student persistence, which you would think would possibly have a role in retention, although it's not necessarily specifically discussed in that way. So those are the main studies I looked at. Just a couple of days ago, I think it was, I also, Jim Julius at MiraCosta sent me a couple reports that are specific for California community colleges and online courses that are successful and student outcomes in online learning. So those links will be available for you if you want to look at it. Because there are people here from outside of MiraCosta and outside of California, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Lisa's putting the links there for you in the chat window if you want to go ahead and look at them, and we can make them, again, available for you in other ways. So really that's it. I can page back to my original questions that I had. I could actually do that real quick here, and we can look at them and see again why I started looking at retention. And afterwards, I felt like I wasn't really totally sure how, if I had any real strong feelings about what would increase retention. After I did this research, there's a lot more out there, so if you've done other research, please share it with us. And I actually had some more questions, things that I wish I could find out more specifics on. But some of the things I thought we could maybe discuss tonight, we have about a half hour here before the end of the session, are, you know, because we can't change the outside factors like the student and who the student is that enrolls and, you know, the department, whatever. There's things maybe that we can do as instructors. What might we do? Is there anything that we can do? Do you see any correlation between certain factors in retention in your own online classes? Is there anything that maybe that you started doing and you think it's helped with retention? That would be really awesome to hear about if you have any thoughts on that. what questions do you want answered about online class retention? I don't know that we can answer them, but we could definitely talk about them and try and find out more from each other. And why is it different in online classes from face-to-face classes? Because it is. It is different, and I remember I showed you back here on this page, there, when it says non-DE, those are the non-distance ed classes and the distance ed classes. So you can see that success is lower as a whole in distance ed and retention is lower as a whole with distance ed. So why is that? Because as far as the research here in California is showing that there is a difference. So those are some of the things I thought maybe we could talk about and see what you think. If you have really specific questions about some of these studies, I'm going to have to go and look for them. I think I noticed, and I was not totally watching the chat window. I think Lisa's probably doing that more. Somebody said something about there's an article that's behind a paywall. Was that you, Lisa? Or somebody. But one of them I did have to go through our library database to find. So that is something that you would you maybe check your library database and see if you can get a hold of that one. Otherwise, the other ones I think I have links for, hopefully, that are still working. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off my mic and see what you all want to talk about.
This is Lisa. I did put in a link to everything as we went along, and I checked most of them as we went. So I think if you scroll back through the chat, you should be able to click on all the links for all the different studies if you want to bookmark them or something like that. So Scott is saying in the chat, connection and a sense of belonging really matter, recognizing students as being there. Tricks for doing that in an online class, what would some of those be where you can create the kind of place that students don't want to leave? I'm just curious whether it's just about discussion or whether it's more than that, something else.
I can share, again, I don't have the answers, but I can share something that I don't know if necessarily creates retention, but it does, I get a positive response from students. Is that every once in a while I go and email students individually, and I just literally type the same email and copy and paste it into an individual email to each of them. So it takes me maybe about 20 minutes to a half hour to do this. I say, dear Lisa, I have my email, from me, whatever. And students feel, they respond to it because I've written to them individually, and they've mentioned that they really appreciate that I check in with them. But again, I don't know that I can tie that to retention, but that's one thing that I have maybe done with a connection to me, a connection to each other, or recognizing that they're there. A connection to each other might be something we could talk about too, or if you have other ideas for how to do that. What do you think, everybody? This is a conversation, so I'm excited to hear what you all think as well.
We've got the capability for several microphones to run, or at least 2 microphones to run at once. So if somebody wants to jump in and talk, that's fine. I'm trying to take the chat and sort of add it to the slide.
Hi. Hi, this is Jody Johnson. I'm on the phone. And I am teaching an online course right now. We're in week 5. And I opened up a journal. And I know with every class it's different, and I put 3 journal posts in. One of them, the first one was just about, okay, you survived the first week. What were your challenges? And what kinds of tools did you use? And then I talked about personality and persistence a little bit, and how when we set goals, even incremental, even big goals, then we need to go back and set incremental goals. So I asked them to identify a goal that they had for the class, and then give me like 3 incremental steps that they thought they would do, and the resources that they would need to do it. And then I tied it also into a character trait. What character trait did they? And I thought it was really kind of a lot, but they ate it up. I was just really, I thought, well, I'm just going to throw this out there and see what happens. And then we just had our midterm, and I want to talk about The next one is, I'm doing it in week 2, week 5, and week 7. I'm doing the journals because I wanted them to be really personal, and the amount that the students opened up was phenomenal. And I feel that really created a sense of community, but it's between me and the students, it's not with the students themselves.
Okay, so the journal idea is interesting. I have found that you mentioned journaling, that with Blackboard you can have a journal, and I'm sure you can do this with other systems as well. And just the word journal seemed to spark something in students when I've used it in the past, that it felt more personal to them, even though it really wasn't. It's kind of the same thing as writing whatever, a piece of paper to me, or a blog post, or a discussion post even, although it can be private in a journal. But they felt that it was more personal. But somebody, at least one student has mentioned that to me, and I'm trying to think, maybe a couple others have mentioned that they liked the journals, that just using that word was nice to them. So I thought that was interesting that you mentioned journaling. And I'm seeing a lot of comments in the side team as well. So take a minute and look at that, but thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, let me ask if Tom could speak. Tom, are you on a microphone where you could speak about these more spontaneous types of interactions and how those would be included?
Hi, my name is Cindy. I'm from MiraCosta.
Hi, we can hear you, Cindy.
Hi, you know, I've taught both online and live courses, and it just seems like, to me, the students retain more on the online just due to the fact that, you know, if they have questions, some were embarrassed to ask it in a live class, or there was so much that preoccupied them that they weren't paying attention. So, you know, somehow we have to get away from that part of embarrassment where they have a question but they think it's stupid, so they don't ask, so they don't understand what's being, you know, talked about.
I think the idea of welcoming questions is really a critical one, and that, you know, I have students email me questions, even, you know, just individually, and they'll apologize, like, I'm sorry I have a question, or I'm sorry I'm bothering you, but that's actually the only way that I can know that they have a question, right, is that if they email me or contact me somehow, and that's so important. That's my job as an instructor. So I think questioning attitude and encouraging questions is an important thing. So I really appreciate you sharing that.
I'd like to bring in what John posted in the chat, because it's a really interesting idea in a number of ways. He wrote in the chat that he's been using Microsoft Word's mail merge feature to pull students' first name and their email addresses from the roster, and then use the Word mail merge to send out 2 personalized emails every week. So it's got the student's name on it. Trying to see whose microphone is bringing it. I can't find it.
Ken, will you text Erin and tell him I'm on a conference call? She's calling me.
Somebody's got their microphone on or phone on.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, could you turn that off for just a sec? Thanks. So I think it's really interesting, because what John's developed here is sort of a technological solution that appears to be personalized, and I can verify that they often see it as personal, because a lot of times I send things out with Moodle's messaging, and they do think I sent it only to them. Even when it's a mass message, I'll get a response like, oh, thanks for checking up on me. So there seems to be something to that. Anything that can make them think they're being contacted individually might be a really good thing to try. John is claiming 5 to 10% increase in retention here.
I think this is great. There's other comments that are coming in the side pane, which I'm trying to read as well. Brian typed about how he uses weekly blogs with comments. Trying to make sure I read all this. Comments on each student's blog beside a group response. They use Padlet discussion board. That would be really where he poses a number of questions and he monitors this. It would be great to hear more about Padlet and if anyone's using that. Does anyone know the details on that? Because I'm not sure that I can talk about Padlet specifically.
Brian, do you have a microphone so you can tell us a little more about how you're using Padlet to do this? Because my understanding is Padlet's kind of like a pin board, but anybody can post on it.
Lisa, it's showing his microphone is turned off. Is there a way to turn it back on? Sorry.
Can you hear me? Can you copy? Hello?
Yeah, we could hear you just fine. Do you want to turn your mic back on?
Brian, we could hear you fine.
I see that John's microphone is on, I think. Do you have anything that you wanted to share? I'm trying to see whose microphone is on. Brian's is off now. I don't see it recording anymore. Any other thoughts about Padlet? If anyone else has a microphone that's used it, like I said, I don't have anything I could add about that specific one. So I'm going to ask or see if there are any other thoughts about any of these questions, and if Brian or anybody gets their microphone working again, that's fine. We can just jump on in. But somebody actually did talk about the correlation they see between certain factors in retention. That's great. Does anyone have more questions that they want answered about online class retention? One of the things that I have a question about is that a lot of these studies look at full semester classes, although not necessarily all classes are full semester. I've personally done pretty well. I'm not like saying that I'm the best with retention, but my 8-week classes actually have pretty decent retention sometimes, and that has been interesting to me that an 8-week format is different maybe than a 15-week or a longer format. And so that was something I have more questions about, is how do we look at different, structured. Oh, go ahead, yeah. Let's go ahead and share. We can hear you. Go ahead, Brian. We can hear you. Can you hear us okay? Brian, if you can hear, if we can hear you okay when you had your mic on, it might be that you end up not being able to hear us. That was happening to me earlier on a different computer, but we can hear you okay if you wanted to share.
I'm not sure who John 3 is who has a microphone open, but the system can't handle too many mics open at once. I'd like to raise a thorny issue, if I may.
Yes, please do.
The thorniest issue, I think, with online retention is that there's an assumption in a lot of these studies that we are at fault when students drop, and that it is primarily things that we do that can make that stop. And yet I've seen studies also that show that differences in pedagogy and differences in course setup don't necessarily affect retention. So I think a lot of us are feeling retention pressure that I'm not seeing actually backed up by the research.
Does anyone have thoughts on that? I think that is a good question to ask or point to make, to discuss a little bit. And also, I'm responding to John here on the side, but I don't want to get us off track of what Lisa just mentioned, and I'll jump back to my response if we get any thoughts on that.
No, I don't think it's probably not off track, actually, because he's talking about self-selection, right? This issue that the kind of students who take our online classes are somehow different from other students that, as Joanne points out, may not be prepared for the level of self-direction. And that's one of the things that I don't know if there's a lot of studies out there on student preparedness, but I think compared to an on-site class, there is less preparedness for that kind of self-direction. So the assumption that the instructor can somehow do something about that, that's what concerns me. Which study did you post here?
I posted one of the community college ones because he's talking about community college, I think specifically. And I think it's this one. I opened it and I'm going to look at it while I just didn't want to miss anything. I think it was like on page 8 or 9 or so, where they actually talk about this issue with students, and what they find was that, and this is, okay, so like, maybe don't quote me on this even though I'm saying it and it's kind of a quote, it's just, I'm trying to remember what exactly it said, but that with everything, when everything was kind of controlled for, the students who are taking online classes actually should probably be doing better than what we're seeing them doing. And so we're trying to figure out what the difference is. So I'm going to look at that and see if I'm saying that correctly. If not, I apologize. But I wanted to show you, to make that report out to John specifically, because there was something in there. I think it was around page 8 or 9. I'll go back and look and see if I can find it. I think it's an interesting thing to talk about, and I would like to see if anyone else has other thoughts on that, if there is something about students who take online classes, or is it just, even though they should be maybe doing better than they're doing, is it because they have a misconception about online classes and they expect to be more like things that they're already doing on the internet, which it isn't. It's much different than what they're already doing on the internet. It's not just clicking on a web page and browsing through it. There's a lot more to it. I'm not sure, so I'm curious what others think, and I'm going to look at this report myself.
And John had just posted about something I had said years ago, is that a lot of online students mistakenly believe that online would be easier. I think as time has gone on, I suspect, and again, I'm not sure where the research is on this, that a lot of the people we used to think, oh, they're taking it online because their lives are complicated, are engaging in the time substitution instead of time shifting. In other words, they're taking an online class because they don't have time to take an on-site class. And if you combine that with the intensity of online classes and any problem, however minor, with self-direction, I think you get failure. So it's not just that they believe that the online class will be easier, but rather that a lot of students who sign up for online classes don't have time for a class, period, and that they think somehow online's going to get around it, if that makes sense. The difficulty is, without research on this, it is very difficult to counter administrative pressure about instructors activities affecting online retention. I've seen very little out there about self-selection, despite the fact that so many of the research studies are based on surveying students.
Yeah, so I went and looked at that study and the one that I just posted, and it does, those pages, it was about page 8 and 9 or so, does provide a conversation about what we're talking about here. I encourage you all to look at that. This is interesting to think about it a little bit more. Again, I have questions, sometimes more than answers, after reading some of these as far as what I can do. But I think it is important to think about and talk about. So I'm just checking the time, and it's 6:45. So we have, I mean, technically we have about 5 more minutes left. We can stay maybe a couple more extra minutes if anyone has more they want to share, because we waited a little bit to get the recording going to take roll and everything before we got started. But I'm curious to see if there's other questions or thoughts about this or something else related to student retention in online classes. Is there anything that you wish you wanted to learn more about in this conversation that you didn't, and that we could maybe try and find out more information on too?
Can we look at Anna's point here in the chat? And you mentioned it too, Laura, at the beginning of your presentation about the 8-week format. The shorter course format seems to increase retention, and why that might be.
So I'm seeing so much conversation aside. Like, I hope everyone's having a chance to look at that. Somebody's saying that 8 weeks has more higher retention than full length. John posted, is there any research on how many students prefer online versus on ground? Now, one thing I can say is that I personally do get a lot of students who take an online class for the first time with me. And the thing with that is they oftentimes, not always, but some of them figure out that they do not like online classes, but they have to learn that through me and through my class. And so they may end up not succeeding or having an issue. So first-time online students who don't really know what it is, that could be an issue. So I'm not sure if that points to things that we could do before the class starts, so they have an expectation of what it is. They make the class available early. I don't know. Again, I can't change what anyone does but myself as an instructor, so I thought about that. And I created a pretty extensive Start Here page this semester, which I really enjoyed making, and students seem to enjoy it as well. But I don't know. I mean, I think that's something to think about. Students who just figure out online is not what they like. They don't like it, and they don't want to be in online classes anymore after mine.
You said you made a page. Do you have the URL to that, or is it something that's inside the LMS?
No, it is a Google site, and I do have it. I will try and post it in here just so people can maybe have an idea of what I put in there. And I used to put this in a bunch of different documents all over the place, and I decided just to make one page. And then I'll just modify it a little bit each semester to make it easier. So anything I can find, I'll post that in. So keep talking. I'm going to have to kind of jump away from the window.
Yeah, we're talking in the chat about the why a class that is shorter might be better. And we've got a number of theories going here about how much they want to commit to and how they perceive the class. And I think some of it may actually be related to just the online environment. You know, how long, if you think of a class as sort of a extended and deeper conversation of some type, how long can you keep that going online and stay focused? I know for me, teaching 16-week classes, you know, we're in, what are we in right now, week 13 or something? I can clearly see how somebody could just, after doing a class for this long, just stop coming, because it is very, very long. It sort of goes back to the old argument about the quarter system versus the semester system. I mean, perhaps if we looked at retention statistics there for regular classes, we might come up with some answers for online too.
To be honest, there could be some things in the documents I just got like a couple days ago, so I haven't had a chance to like scour them as closely as I want about some of these issues. But if I do come across anything else, hopefully, I'll be able to somehow indicate that in what we post here later on for you all. But I haven't seen anything specifically. I did post my semester prep site in case anyone wants to take a peek at it. It's not a secret. You can use what you'd like from it for yourself. It's out there for my students to use. But yeah, it's just what I do. Everyone does it differently, so you don't have to do it my way. But just for ideas' sake, maybe you'll get something out of that. All right. I don't know that any community colleges use a quarter system. I don't think so. So if you wanted to look at like quarter system, you'd probably have to go to, you know, higher or more university level and then look at lower level classes, so, you know, freshman and sophomore classes. But I do know that I taught at a different community college and their semesters were shorter than MiraCosta's. And so there is some variation, and that might be changing and shifting all the time. I'm not quite sure how individual colleges make those decisions about things like drop dates that was mentioned earlier, things like the length of a semester, how they kind of schedule things. But I know if you teach at more than one community college, which many of you probably do, you don't have the same breaks. Your classes all start at different times and end at different times. It's kind of all over the place. So it's interesting to maybe look at some of those factors as well. If a class goes really late into December, does that change things because it's around that time when people are starting to get really busy and stuff happens? Or if they end earlier in December, I don't know. Those are all things that are kind of interesting to think about. That's for fall. I'm in fall mode. But there could be issues for spring as well.
I'm kind of suggesting that we close here because we need to close, that we might do some additional research on some of these and come back and talk again.
I think that would be a really neat idea. Please contact me. You have my email because I've emailed you if you've enrolled. If not, you know I'm in the Facebook group, whatever, and let me know what you're thinking or if there's anything that you have as follow-up. Also, this if you are MiraCosta College faculty, you will get a link to a what's it called, survey about this, so please fill that out. And I think that's it. Thank you so much for attending. We're probably going to turn off the recording now, and if anyone needs to stick around for any reason, let us know. Anything final from you?
Yeah, I need to repeat because some people came in late. If you are MiraCosta College faculty and you want to get flex credit, you need to type your full name into the chat room. I have everybody who's already done that, but if you did not type your full name in the chat room, you have to do that or you won't be on our roster. Let me thank Laura so much for doing this, both for doing the research and being willing to present. Much appreciated. I'm hoping we'll have more of these in the future, and thank you everybody for coming.
Yes, thank you so much for coming. I'm turning off the recording now. Have a great evening, everyone.